What would you do if one reckless, rain-slicked moment, you crossed a line so definitive, so utterly forbidden, you knew you could never, ever uncross it? I never thought I was capable of such a transgression. I was the good wife, devoted, patient, reliable, but then the storm came. Both outside and within, the power died, and in the suffocating, intimate darkness, with my body pressed against his, my stepson's, I discovered a hunger so deep, so raw, it terrified me to my very core. This is the story of how I shattered a sacred, unspoken boundary with the one person I never should have, irrevocably changing my marriage, my family, and my very self. It is a terrifying question, isn't it? When does profound loneliness create a void so dangerous that any unexpected temptation, however forbidden, can rush in to fill it? My name is Sophia, and before that night, before the storm, before him, I was someone else entirely. I was the kind of woman people often described as steady, as reliable, the sort of wife who always remembered birthdays, who ensured the house was spotless before guests arrived, who never, ever let the wine run dry at her husband's important dinner parties. Richard, my husband, often called me his rock. It was meant as a compliment, I suppose, though sometimes, in the quiet, lonely moments, it felt more like a life sentence. I met Richard 10 years ago at a charity gala in downtown New York. He was handsome in that polished, corporate way, salt and pepper hair, a Rolex that likely cost more than my first car, and a confident smile that promised enduring stability and financial security. I was 43 then, recently, and painfully, divorced, still nursing the raw, open wounds of a marriage that had crumbled under the immense weight of my ex-husband's blatant, unapologetic infidelity. Richard was different. He was solid, predictable, safe. We married after a whirlwind, year-long courtship. He swept me off my feet not with youthful passion, but with lavish vacations, whispered promises of unwavering security, and a sprawling, beautiful home in a wealthy Connecticut suburb, where the lawns were perpetually, immaculately green and the neighbors never, ever raised their voices. And then there was Leo, Richard's son, my new stepson. Leo was 21 when I first met him, all brooding, resentful silences and a simmering, youthful anger, still raw from his own parents' bitter, acrimonious divorce. His mother, I was told, had unceremoniously decamped to Italy with her wealthy new husband, leaving Leo behind like a piece of forgotten, unwanted luggage. I tried, genuinely, to be kind to him, maternal even, in those early days, but Leo wasn't interested in a replacement mom. He was, however, I noticed with a growing, unsettling awareness, interested in watching me. At first, I dismissed it as my overactive, perhaps even flattering, imagination, the almost imperceptible way his dark gaze would linger a moment too long when I bent to pick up a dropped napkin at dinner. How he always seemed to be conveniently shirtless when I happened to pass his room. The knowing, almost challenging smirk he'd sometimes flash in my direction when Richard wasn't looking. As if he knew a secret about me that even I hadn't yet dared to acknowledge. I ignored it. I had to. I was Sophia, Richard's wife, the good wife, the stable one, until the night I wasn't. The cracks beneath our marriage's seemingly perfect surface had been silently, insidiously oozing for years. Richard traveled for work more often than not, leaving me alone for weeks at a time in that big, empty, echoing house, with nothing but my own lonely thoughts and the occasional, perfunctory text message as company, home soon. Next week, next month, after this big deal finally closes. I told myself I didn't mind, that I understood the demands of his high-powered career. But then I'd catch Leo watching me across the silent dinner table. His knee sometimes, perhaps accidentally, perhaps not, brushing against mine beneath it. And something deep inside me would twist with a confusing, forbidden, yet undeniable ache. It wasn't just him, I knew, with a shame that burned. It was me too, the subtle, almost unconscious way I'd started dressing differently when I knew he'd be home from his part-time job. A slightly lower neckline on my blouse. A soft cashmere sweater that clung just a little tighter to my curves. The way I'd find excuses to linger in the kitchen when he was there. Pretending not to notice how his eyes would trace the curve of my waist as I reached for a coffee mug. I was playing with fire. I knew it, And God help me, I was beginning to like the heat. The night of the storm. The power outage should have been nothing more than a minor, temporary inconvenience. I remember standing in the vast, dark kitchen, wiping my damp hands on a dish towel, listening to the relentless, rhythmic drumming of the storm against the large picture windows. Richard was away, of course, another last-minute business trip. Another cold, empty side of our king-sized bed. The house felt unnervingly, suffocatingly quiet, but Ethan, Leo, was home. 22 years old now, all lean, graceful muscle and a quiet, coiled confidence. The kind of dangerously attractive young man who moved through the world as if he knew exactly what he wanted. And how to get it. He had his father's sharp, determined jawline, but his biological mother's dark, almost unnervingly knowing eyes that always seemed to linger a crucial second too long when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd always told myself I was just imagining it. Then, the lights went out. A savage, brilliant crack of lightning split the dark sky, and the entire house was plunged into an abrupt, almost suffocating darkness. The low, familiar hum of the refrigerator died. The television screen in the living room blinked off into nothingness. Suddenly, the only sound was the relentless, driving rain and my own quickening, shallow breath. Wow, Leo muttered from the adjoining living room, his voice startlingly, unnervingly close in the sudden dark. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut a shaky, uncertain path through the oppressive darkness. Power's out, I said, my voice high-pitched, stating the painfully obvious. Yeah, no kidding. His voice was even closer now than I had expected. I turned, and there he was, barely a foot away from me. The single, harsh beam of the flashlight cast sharp, dramatic shadows across his handsome face, highlighting the sensual curve of his lips. The way his damp t-shirt clung revealingly to his broad, muscular chest. He must have just come from the small gym in our basement. I could smell the faint, primal musk of sweat on his skin, beneath the clean, sharp scent of his body wash. My throat suddenly went bone dry. Did you check the breaker? I asked, my voice coming out too quickly, too breathlessly. Yeah, he replied, his gaze intense. It's the storm. He shifted his weight slightly, and in the dim, dancing, intimate light, I saw his gaze drop, just for a fraction of a second, to the deep V of my silk blouse. I should have stepped back then. I should have made some excuse. Retreated upstairs, locked myself in my bedroom until the relative safety of morning. But I didn't. Then, I tripped. A loose corner of the antique rug. A stupid, clumsy, fateful misstep in the unfamiliar, disorienting dark. My ankle twisted awkwardly beneath me, and I lurched forward with a startled, undignified gasp. Leo caught me instantly, his hands landing firmly, possessively, on my waist, his grip surprisingly strong, but the forward momentum was too much for us both. We crashed, in a tangle of limbs, onto the plush living room couch. Me, sprawled awkwardly on top of him, my legs, to my horror and a sudden, illicit thrill, inadvertently straddling his lean, hard hips. And that's when I realized, with a jolt of pure, unadulterated panic, that the charge, unspoken closeness between us had now irrevocably, terrifyingly crossed into dangerous, forbidden territory. His body reacted before he could possibly hide it. A hard, undeniable pressure rising against me. And mine, God help me, my own traitorous body responded in kind. A searing heat flooded my cheeks, pooled low and heavy in my stomach. My breath hitched in my throat as I tried, weakly, to push myself up, to create some semblance of distance, of propriety. But his grip on my waist tightened, almost imperceptibly, holding me there, firmly in place against him. I wanted this, too. The thought, unbidden, shocking, shameful, seared through my mind. For one endless, suspended, heart-stopping second, neither of us moved. The very air between us was electric, thick with something unspoken, something dangerous, something that now felt utterly, completely inevitable. I could feel his heartbeat where our bodies were so intimately pressed together. A rapid, unsteady thrum that perfectly matched my own. His breath was warm, shockingly, breathtakingly intimate, against my lips, and I liked it. And then, his hand slid slowly, deliberately, up my sides, over the smooth, cool silk of my blouse. A slow, languorous, almost reverent exploration. Sophia, he whispered, his name for me a plea, a surrender, a question. His answer was a rough, ragged exhale from his own lungs. His hips shifting slightly, almost imperceptibly, beneath me, a subtle, yet undeniable movement, letting me feel, without any doubt, just how much he wanted this. How much he wanted me. I didn't want it. I had to stop it. The denial, I knew even then, was a feeble, pathetic lie, even to my own ears. Instead, with a sense of dizzying, reckless abandon, I leaned down, and there, in the oppressive, intimate darkness of our silent house, with the wild storm raging like a primal beast outside, a single, profound moment of personal weakness, of emotional starvation, turned into a kiss that should never, ever have happened. When the lights, just minutes later, with a cruel, almost mocking sense of timing, flickered back on, we sprang apart like two guilty, startled teenagers caught in the very act. Leo's lips were swollen, his pupils blown wide with a mixture of desire and shock, his chest rising and falling rapidly as if he'd just run a mile. I couldn't look at him directly. And yet, I couldn't look away. Neither of us spoke. What was there, really, to say? We had just, together, crossed a sacred, uncrossable line. I'm your stepmother. The words formed silently in my head. But they couldn't, make it past my lips. This can never, ever happen again. But as I finally, shakily, fled to the sanctuary of my own room, my body still humming, still burning with the illicit, unforgettable memory of his touch, his taste, I knew one thing with an absolute, chilling certainty, with a profound dread that settled like a block of ice in my veins. It would happen again. And again. The next morning, I woke to a text from Richard. Flight delayed. Won't be home until Thursday. 3 more days. 3 more days of this searing heat in my veins. This suffocating guilt in my throat. This vivid, burning memory of Leo's mouth on mine. I dressed with meticulous, almost defiant care. A beautiful silk blouse Richard had bought me on a long-ago trip. A pair of expensive black slacks that hugged my hips. My most expensive perfume. For myself, I lied silently. Downstairs, Leo was in the kitchen, shirtless, scrambling eggs as if nothing extraordinary had happened between us. As I entered, his muscles flexed, his stomach tightened. He turned, his dark, knowing eyes raking slowly, deliberately, over my carefully assembled facade. Morning, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. I should have walked away then. But I stepped closer. The first time it truly, consciously happened again was in the laundry room, of all places, a stupid, mundane, almost laughable place for a forbidden affair to truly begin. The late morning sun was bleeding through the small window. I'd gone in to retrieve a towel. Leo had followed me, the door clicking shut softly, definitively. Behind him, there were no words. Then his hands were on me, turning me, pressing me back firmly against the gently vibrating washing machine. His mouth crashed down on mine. Hotter this time, hungrier. I gasped into his mouth. And he seemed to swallow the sound. His strong fingers digging almost painfully into the soft flesh of my hips. I wanted this. Tell me to stop, Sophia, he breathed against my lips. A challenge, a plea. I couldn't. My hands, with a will of their own, fisted in his thick, dark hair as I arched into him. My body a traitor to my mind. A loud thud from the machine as the cycles switched. Water rushed through the pipes. Leo smirked against my mouth. Guess we're not the only ones getting wet today. I kissed his bare chest. Laughing, breathless, undeniably, exhilaratingly alive. Then his mouth was on my neck. His knee nudging my legs apart. All coherent thought, all sense of right and wrong, simply vanished. The guilt, I realized with a jolt. How little, how terrifyingly little, it mattered in that moment. Afterward, regret, shame, never came, not in the way I expected. Just this insatiable need, coiled deep inside me, sharper, more potent, than any sense of shame. Later, Leo, traced idle circles on my bare shoulder. Our bodies tangled together on his bed. In his childhood room, the very same room where old baseball trophies still lined the shelves. silent, mocking witnesses to our transgression. You're thinking too loud, he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. I was thinking of Richard, of course. Of his cold, perfunctory goodbyes. Of his complete absence of touch in so many months. And I was thinking of how right now, in this moment, in this young man's arms, I didn't care. I didn't care at all. Leo rolled on top of me then, his familiar weight both a comfort and a thrill, and nipped gently at my earlobe. He doesn't deserve you, Sophia, he whispered, and as his hips rocked against mine, I let myself, for a moment, believe him. We got reckless after that. Quick, desperate trysts in quiet corners of the house. Whenever Richard worked late, which was often, my hands fisted in Leo's hair as he knelt between my thighs in his own father's home office. A place that now felt desecrated, charged with our illicit secret. The lines between our mistakes and our desires had not just blurred, they had been completely, utterly obliterated. We showered together, the hot water sluicing over our bodies as I muffled my moans against his strong shoulder. Once, we were almost caught. Richard came home unexpectedly early from a cancelled dinner meeting. Leo barely had time to yank his jeans up before the key turned in the front door lock. I remember standing there, my skirt smooth, my blouse buttoned, my pulse hammering a frantic, guilty rhythm against my ribs as Richard walked in, clueless, smiling his absent, distracted smile, bestowing upon me his usual, passionless kiss. Missed you, he'd said, without looking at me, and Leo, standing just behind his father's back, had smirked, a silent, shared, thrilling secret between us. That night, I cried in the shower, the hot water mingling with my tears of guilt, of excitement, of shame. I texted Leo the very moment Richard finally fell asleep. Point of no return. I knew we couldn't last. I knew that, but I found myself lost in a series of reckless, intoxicating decisions, completely, willfully unaware of the devastating consequences that were inevitably, rapidly approaching. You're mine now, he had whispered to me once. And in my heart, I knew I didn't want it to end, even if it destroyed me, destroyed us all. Richard's flight home was delayed. Again, a series of client meetings had been unexpectedly cancelled, a fact he had conveniently failed to mention until his car finally, unannounced, pulled into our driveway 2 full days earlier than I had anticipated. I was in the kitchen, still flushed, still breathless, from Leo's passionate mouth on mine just minutes before. The garage door rumbled open, a sound that made my stomach drop, my blood run cold. Shit. Leo's voice was a low, urgent whisper from the hallway. I turned just as Richard's keys jingled in the front door lock. There was no time to fix my smudged lipstick, to rebutton my blouse correctly. Richard stepped inside, his briefcase thudding heavily onto the floor. Surprise, he announced, a forced, weary grin on his face. You're early, I stammered, my smile feeling stiff, unnatural on my face. His gaze flickered past me then, to Leo, who was now leaning casually, a little too casually, against the refrigerator, barefoot, a smug, almost challenging look on his face. An unreadable expression crossed Richard's face. You two look busy, he said, his voice carefully neutral. The silence in that kitchen stretched, taut and unbearable. Leo smirked. Just helping Eleanor, Sophia, with the groceries, he said smoothly. The grocery bag, I remembered with a fresh jolt of panic, was still in the trunk of my car. Richard's eyes narrowed, just slightly, a flicker of suspicion. Dinner that night was a minefield of unspoken accusations and veiled questions. Richard watched my every move, his questions sharp, probing. Finished that big report for work. Leo, you seem to be home a lot more lately. Sophia, what's that mark on your neck? I touched the spot where Leo's teeth had been just hours before. My cheeks burning. Oh, just a yoga accident. Funny, Richard had mused, his fork clinking softly against his plate. I never knew you liked yoga. Dear, let's call him. I started locking my bedroom door at night then. Not to keep Richard out, but to keep myself from going to Leo's room. It didn't work. I woke one night to find his fingers gently trailing up my thigh, his breath hot and familiar against my skin. Missed you, he'd whispered, his voice a low growl. Your father's just down the hall. His hand slid higher. Makes it hotter, doesn't it? And the worst, most shameful part was, he was right. It was quiet, quick, desperate. As Leo crept back to his own room later, I heard the faint creak of Richard's bedroom door opening. I froze, my heart stopping. I heard his footsteps, the bathroom light flicking on. I exhaled, a shaky breath of relief. Then I noticed it, Leo's phone, glowing softly on my nightstand. A new text message, from Richard. We need to talk, now. Leo, when I showed him the text, just laughed it off. He's probably just pissed I missed my curfew or something. But Richard's stares grew longer. His questions sharper, more pointed. The morning he accidentally dropped his briefcase on the floor. Papers spilling everywhere. I knelt down to help him. And I saw it. A receipt, tucked into a folder, for a private investigator, dated yesterday. That night, Richard poured 2 large bourbons. I want a divorce, Sophia, he said, his face a calm, unreadable mask. It's Leo, isn't it? My glass slipped from my nerveless fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Richard, his name was now Thomas. Marcus, in my confused memory, just smiled. A cold, knowing, utterly terrifying smile. I've seen how he looks at you, Sophia, and more importantly, how you let him. I had expected rage, shouting, accusations, not this quiet, chilling certainty. He leaned forward then, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. Leave now, Sophia, with him, and I'll pretend I never noticed a thing. I packed one small bag. Leo was waiting outside, his truck's engine already running. As we peeled away from the curb, away from my life, my phone buzzed. Richard's final text. You'll regret this. Liam, Leo just said, his voice confident. He's wrong, Sophia. But as our new, uncertain life began, one single, terrifying thought echoed in my mind. What have I done? The motel room smelled of bleach and profound regret. Leo threw our bags onto the one lumpy bed. That familiar, confident smirk on his face. A smirk that, for the first time, didn't make my heart flutter, but made my hands shake. You okay, babe? He asked, already peeling off his t-shirt. As if our lives hadn't just completely, catastrophically exploded. I laughed then, a hollow, humorless sound, and stepped closer to him. Yeah, I lied. And he wasn't touching you. I was. His fingers dug into my hips then, and I should have pushed him away. But I didn't. His touch was rougher now. His kisses edged with something new. Something that wasn't tenderness. Teeth, nails, no more pretense of love. Or even affection. Just a raw, desperate need. Afterward, as Leo slept soundly beside me, his breathing even, untroubled, I crept quietly to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left inside me. The reckoning, Richard's quiet, calculated revenge, came 3 days later. My card was declined at the bank. Our joint accounts had been completely frozen. An eviction notice was served on Leo's truck at our motel. Then, the email arrived, with the subject line, "For your records." The attachments were a series of high-resolution security footage stills from our own home security system. A system I had forgotten even existed. Me, pressing Leo eagerly against the refrigerator. My own search history, from my own laptop. Can a stepmother legally marry her stepson? And then, the final, devastating attachment. A forwarded message to Leo's own mother. My sister-in-law, your son has been sleeping with my wife. Leo's phone blew up then. Mom? What have you done? A call from his college coach. You're off the team. Son. An unknown number. Hope she was worth it. He smashed his phone against the cheap motel wall. I sat there, perfectly still, staring at the last attachment Richard had sent. Our finalized divorce papers, with a brutal, damning stipulation. Wife forfeits all claims to marital assets due to proven infidelity with a family member. Richard had planned it all. Had waited patiently. Had let me walk right into his perfectly laid trap. The fantasy, my beautiful, intoxicating fantasy, had cracked, had shattered. Leo started drinking then, hard, not the playful, social beers he'd had at home. This was a dark, downward spiral. He'd slam cabinets, his grip on my wrists sometimes a little too tight, muttering constantly about how Richard had ruined everything. One night, he came back to the motel reeking of a cheap, sweet perfume that was definitely not mine. I pretended not to notice. What right did I have to say anything? It all finally, truly, came to a head at a cheap Waffle House at 2 o'clock in the morning. Leo was on his third bourbon. His eyes bloodshot. Angry. Maybe we should slow down a bit. Leo, I suggested tentatively, my fork clattering nervously against my plate. You mean me, Sophia? He'd hissed, his voice full of a venom I had never heard from him before. You used me, didn't you? You were bored, and I was just there. And now you're stuck with me. Admit it. The couple in the next booth stopped eating, their eyes wide. My throat burned with shame. That's not true. Leo, my voice dropped to a near whisper. I miss the big house. Don't you? Your rich husband? He sneered. Why don't you go crawl back to him? See if he still wants you now? Everyone knows about us. I threw a glass of water in his face then. He just laughed. A harsh, ugly sound, wiping the water from his chin with the back of his hand. There's the real Sophia I like, he'd said. I woke up alone in that cheap motel room the next morning. His duffel bag was gone. And so was the $300 I had carefully hidden in my sock drawer. All that was left was a hastily scrawled note on the motel's cheap, branded stationery. You're not the first, Sophia, and you won't be the last. Jake, his real name, I presumed, or just another lie. I laughed until I cried. I called the only person left in the world I could possibly call. Richard picked up on the second ring. Sophia, was all he said, just my name, no anger, no gloating, just a quiet, knowing finality. I closed my eyes. I want to come home. Richard. There was a pause that seemed to last a lifetime. Then, his voice, calm, measured, you already are home. Look outside. I pulled back the thin, grimy motel curtain. Richard's sleek, black BMW was there, idling silently, patiently, waiting. It had always been there. I realized with a fresh wave of despair. Just waiting for me to finally hit rock bottom. I always stood there for about 10 minutes. Just watching the reflection in the car's tinted window, my smudged mascara, my tangled, unwashed hair, the ghost of Ethan's, Leo's, fingerprints still, I imagined, on my skin. My phone rang again. Richard. I let it go to voicemail. I packed my one small bag, left the motel key on the nightstand, and walked out. I walked past Richard's waiting BMW, past the rundown motel office, past everything I thought I had once so desperately wanted. He didn't follow me. He didn't have to. Some punishments, I was beginning to learn, don't require physical chains. I found myself in a generic coffee shop, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and burned coffee beans. I stirred my untouched latte, the foam slowly, sadly dissolving. My therapist had told me to journal, to process the trauma. All I could seem to write was, I miss the house. I miss my old life. I don't miss him, so why'd I miss both of them? It was the cruelest part. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Court, 2 p.m. Final divorce decree. Richard, as it turned out, had been surprisingly, almost cruelly, generous in the end. No alimony for me, of course. But no lawsuits either. A clean, clinical break. As I was about to finally silence my phone, a new text came through. From an unknown number. Look behind you. My stomach dropped. Ethan, no. Leo, no. Whatever his name was, slid into the chair opposite me. A cocky, familiar grin on his face. New tattoos snaked up his arms. His hair was longer, his jaw sharper. Miss me? He asked. I didn't even blink. You stole my money. He just shrugged. You stole my dad's wife. For a little while. Seems fair. A barista called out a name, Jesse. And he winked at me. A new life. A new name. It seemed. I watched him saunter over to the counter. Saw how the college girls at the next table giggled, their eyes following him. The same Ethan. The same Leo. Just a different prey. He returned. Dropped a folded newspaper on the table in front of me. The society page. Richard Thorne's engagement to tech CEO Madeline Brooks. A glossy photo. Richard, smiling. His arm wrapped possessively around a beautiful, blonde woman half his age. Ethan leaned in. He had her lined up long before we even left. You know. I sipped my cold coffee. I know, I said, my voice flat. I'd seen the emails, the hotel receipts, the lies I had so willingly So desperately. Ignored while I was so completely fixated on my own. Ethan's smirk finally faded. You're not even mad at him? Oh, I'm furious, I said, carefully setting my cup down. Just not at him anymore. Ethan waited until I stood up to leave. She's pregnant, by the way, he said casually. I froze. Due in March. A towering, final irony. Richard and I had tried for years to have a child. Failed. He had always, subtly, blamed me. And now, this. Ethan stepped closer, his breath hot on my ear. A parting shot. I could make you forget him again. You know. I walked past the staring customers. Past the pitying barista. Past the ghost of the woman I used to be. A week later, a letter arrived at my new, small apartment. Thick, expensive linen paper. Richard's familiar monogram. Inside was just one single, devastating sentence. I forgive you. No signature. No plea. Just absolution. An absolution I knew, with a certainty that burned. I absolutely did not deserve. I burned the letter. The final truth. My therapist always asks me why I'm still here. In therapy. Because I chose a boy over my life. I tell her. And then, the unspoken part. The part that still haunts me in the dead of night, and because some small, treacherous part of me, even now, would probably do it all over again. Those silent, stretching years of reckoning after that. They were their own quiet, relentless punishment. After finally leaving Ethan, or rather, after he left me, I burned all my remaining bridges, all my old contacts, and moved to a small, anonymous town where no one knew my name, my history. I took an under-the-table job at a greasy spoon diner. The kind of place where the manager leered and my hands were perpetually stained with old coffee and grease. I looked at my reflection in the grimy diner window sometimes and saw a stranger. Hollow cheeks, tired eyes, a deep, soul weariness that no amount of sleep could ever fix. The rent on my small, damp apartment was barely covered each month by my meager earnings. The faucet in the tiny bathroom perpetually leaked. A steady, maddening drip that echoed the slow erosion of my own spirit. My neighbors fought, their angry, bitter words seeping through the thin, unforgiving walls. I spent most of my nights just staring up at the water-stained ceiling. Wondering, obsessively, if Richard ever thought of me. If Ethan had found someone else to destroy. If my life was now just this. This endless shame. This quiet desperation. Seeing their names, their lives, moving on online was a form of self-torture. Richard's new, successful life on LinkedIn. Ethan's various social media profiles. Under various new names. His struggles, his triumphs, all playing out in a world I was no longer a part of. A sad, pathetic reflection. My fingers would tremble as I'd click away. The past nipping at my heels like a hungry dog. The holidays were always the worst. Spent alone with a bottle of cheap wine and the television blaring. A hollow substitute for human connection. The few old friends I had left tiptoed around me. Their pity almost worse than their judgment. The years began to blur into a gray, monotonous landscape of pure survival. My looks, the beauty I had once so casually relied on, began to fade, replaced by a harshness, a weariness, that seemed to settle deep in my bones. I finally, after hitting what I truly believed was rock bottom, found my way into counseling. And one rainy Tuesday, staring at a community college brochure pinned to the bulletin board in my therapist's waiting room, I saw a course listing for a counseling degree. And something faint, something incredibly fragile, yet surprisingly persistent, stirred within me. A possibility of helping others who were as lost, as broken, as I had been. It was a long road. I knew, a daunting, almost insurmountable one, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't entirely impossible. That first, shaky step towards a new life, towards some form of redemption, wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet, tentative. It was about acknowledging that while my mistakes were heavy, they didn't have to be completely, utterly crushing, not forever. It was about finally, after so many years, looking at the woman in the mirror, the stranger with the tired eyes, and seeing someone, finally, that I could perhaps, one day, learn to live with again, if not yet love. This journey, I know now, is a difficult, often painful one, through the darkest corners of regret, consequence, and the faintest, most fragile glimmer of possible redemption. And it makes one wonder, doesn't it, about the nature of forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, and the often unseen strength it takes to simply choose to begin again. Even from the deepest, most desolate of ruins?